Hi, I'm Daniela. I co-founded a hardware startup about a little over 2 years ago. And we're based in Brooklyn. We started working at New York City Resistor, which is a hardware hack space in Brooklyn, in Boerum Hill. It's actually the same space that MakerBot was born out of. And if any of you are not familiar with it, you should really visit it. It's an amazing ecosystem. And so what is goTenna? Before I get into what I'm going to talk about, just briefly. So goTenna is a device that pairs wirelessly with the phone you already have on you and allows you to communicate with anyone else without any service. So it's a totally decentralized, ad hoc, reconfigurable communication system that works with the phone you already have on you. And the idea came mostly during the experience of Hurricane Sandy, when a bunch of towers went down and power was out, so the normal methods of communication were not available. And the idea is, our bet anyway, beyond this first product, is that distributed forms of communication make a lot of sense, and we're starting with the phones people already have on them to make them completely independent of Wi-Fi, satellites, or cell towers. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've learned with regards to supply chain. I'll caveat everything by saying that not only am I a first-time founder, I'd never worked in hardware before. I'd only worked at software companies, startups. So I've learned a lot, and that helps to explain why I started in the absolute worst place possible, which is here. And I'm going to zoom in. I literally started at Alibaba.com. When it came time to search for a manufacturer, this is actually what I considered a potentially good idea. I spent about 5 days getting very demoralized and continuing to pick myself up off the floor because none of it made sense. And so this is not actually how you want to start your supply chain process. Instead, I finally had a moment of revelation, which was that I didn't probably have to do it all by myself, and I certainly didn't need to reinvent the wheel. And so, just remember that. Oh, the clicker's here. Oh, great. Got it. So there are a few different options when you are ready to kick off a supply chain. Obviously, if you happen to have a founder or someone on the team who's an incredible a supply chain person, fantastic, but that's not most companies even. And so, we talk to supply chain consultants. There are people who have taken products to market at huge companies like Nike and Apple or whatnot, and you can work with people like that. Unfortunately, in my experience, the really talented people are not in New York City. They are on the West Coast, and we really wanted to be able to work with someone here. You can go to a supply chain management firm and pick and choose what you need throughout the supply chain. You can also join a hardware accelerator. That really didn't make a lot of sense for us because we were already funded. So from an equity perspective and also timing perspective, it wasn't perfect, but they usually come married to a supply chain management firm. You can also go out and hire either a C-level or really junior head of ops. But honestly, when we started to look into manufacturing, we both couldn't afford exactly who I would have wanted to grow with a company for a long time, and we were barely 4 people. So that's not where we wanted to put our resources. We decided to go with a full-service firm, and a really great firm will be able to do basically everything for you, from sourcing the CM to negotiating the terms, sourcing the components as you try to drive down your cost. And they will also even be, your eyes on the ground on the manufacturing line. If you can't be there always, which is the case for most startups, you can still have, someone there as your proxy who potentially even knows more than you anyhow. And they can also help you set up distribution and fulfillment. So one of the best things, and I didn't expect that this was going to be part of the supply chain process for me, and the reason I'm going to dive into this today is because I don't think most startups do this. We did a global supply chain model. What this basically was is we looked at a variety of different options of where we might end up manufacturing. Obviously, I went straight to Alibaba.com and I thought, okay, Shenzhen, that's all that's out there. And what was really great about this global supply chain model that I'm going to walk through is that it allowed us to see where else we might consider manufacturing. It really opened up literally the doors to the entire world. And so we could compare everything from cost to time and both the soft costs and the hard costs. And so that was the objective of the model. There were other smaller objectives, for instance, understanding the trade-off, if there were any at all, between shipping time and cost, as well as the relative importance of different cost components, everything from the materials to the VAM, which is the value-added manufacturing. That's the profit and labor that the CM takes the transportation and inventory. We started with certain assumptions. The point of the model was not to know exactly how much it would cost to make everywhere, but to understand the relative costs. And so, based on where we were at that point, we were guessing, and thank God the number's a lot lower now, but just for the purposes of walking through this, that the total, the bill of materials was going to be about $25, that we also assumed that packaging would just be $1 to keep it simple. And we also assumed that electronic components would always come from Shenzhen, and that's because they do. But that board assembly would take place at the CM. We used Shenzhen as the base case to which we then compared other scenarios. So we estimated assembly and test times as well as overhead costs. So exactly, it's amazing. A CM will charge you for every single second that anyone on the line is touching anything on your circuit board. We modeled this out as well. So this was our baseline. And I then sat in front of a huge list of locations that I didn't even know manufactured consumer electronics. And I decided to model out, or have our supply chain firm model out 5 locations. So obviously I did choose Shenzhen. I picked 2 places that I was surprised to see the direct labor costs were cheaper. I picked Ho Chi Minh City and Bangkok. I also picked Guadalajara. I have to say I was not expecting to see that Mexico had so many CECMs, but they did, and so I picked Guadalajara because I thought, hey, if they end up being great and they are nearby, that would be awesome. And then I also picked San Jose to model that out, just to see what really is the cost, and it might be interesting to all of you, what is the cost of made in USA? A lot. If some things, and I'm taking this directly from the supply chain model that we did, some things were not that surprising. Obviously, much more expensive to manufacture domestically. But what was interesting and somewhat unexpected to me was how similar it would cost to manufacture in a variety of other places. So we think only about China, but there's really other options. Then you start looking at other things that you don't, when you think beyond dollars, what about the time it takes to fulfill the entire supply chain, delivery time, for instance. Here, obviously, when you're delivering from Asia, whether it's Thailand, Vietnam, or China, over ocean freight, it takes quite a long time to get anywhere. And then obviously Guadalajara and San Jose can be there pretty quickly. That being said, what was interesting in our case, and obviously when I say this out loud, it makes a ton of sense, but I didn't expect it, is that by shipping air from Asia, it didn't actually drive up our logistics costs tremendously, and that's because our product, each device is about 2 ounces. We sell them in pairs, so it's 4 ounces. Landed with cables and packaging and everything, it's still under 8 ounces. So for small products, it's actually not that much, it's not much more expensive to send it 2 months over the ocean versus, half a day, or, half a day from airport to airport. So that was interesting. So while Bangkok and Ho Chi Minh City were starting to look really, really interesting to me, when I took a deeper dive into other things, such as, for instance, supply chain response time. So what happens if all of a sudden you have the really, really great problem of enormous upside that you didn't expect? How quickly can you fulfill those orders? That's where you start to see that in manufacturing in locations like Vietnam or Thailand, because they're not as evolved from a manufacturing perspective yet, that's where other costs come in, right? You're going to have to wait a lot longer. You might not be able to meet demand. So what I really learned from the supply chain is, what I've been underlining since I started talking about this, is that China really, really, really isn't always the answer. Here, you see a total cost comparison, and the thing that was hugely striking for me is that in the end, basically everything was within 10% of what it would cost to manufacture in China anyway. So I was going to have to look at other factors beyond the dollar amount to manufacture in terms of deciding where we actually were going to do this. I ended up deciding to manufacture goTenna in Mexico. We're actually working with the CM in Chihuahua, and the reasons that we ended up going that way were a few. One is that they had incredible category expertise in manufacturing what we're doing. So we are manufacturing an RF product. We needed someone who understood a lot about testing rigorously RF products. They had manufactured medical beepers, industrial grade radios for military use. So that was really huge for us. The other thing too is that, of course, Mexico is pretty close by. I speak Spanish. The idea of being able to, one, speak to someone on relatively the same time zone, Central Time, being able to communicate culturally and otherwise. And there's also something amazing, which is NAFTA. So I don't have any duties when I bring the product back into the United States for distribution. So that was amazing. And any issues I had about like, oh, but everyone does it in China. China must be better, right? Because I did feel that, and you feel that always when you make any decision. The great thing about the CM we selected is that they have copy exact facilities in China. So if we're ever lucky enough to be making a lot more than, say, the line in Chihuahua can support, 6 weeks, we can set up the exact same processes, the exact same line in China. So that was pretty amazing. And the thing too is that, I mean, I'll be perfectly honest, I thought we were going to be shipping our product, which we started selling on pre-order last summer, late last year. Everything is so slow in the supply chain. I can't even imagine how much slower and how much more quote unquote delayed we would be if we had actually gone to China, because we've been able to go, be in Mexico so quickly to solve any issues. And so I am all for thinking way beyond Shenzhen. We did take a tour of a variety of different CMs in doing this. Our supply chain firm also helped us make that decision. Beyond the category expertise that I mentioned earlier, we also chose them because they have incredible design for manufacturing capabilities in-house. So as you guys probably know, the prototype that you design in your own office and that you test and you make, dozens or, dozens and dozens of, it's very different when you start making them in runs of thousands. And so the fact that they have been able to really give a tremendous amount of value add on DFM has been really amazing. It's helped us drop our costs in all sorts of things and drive efficiencies. Remember, every little femtosecond that they're touching your circuit board counts. So they've helped us with that. The testing capabilities, I mean, we've had to design our own testing jigs, really expensive, laborious process, but we are really confident that even on the days that we're not there in the factory with them, which, really hopefully are going to be most days, we're not going to be there, really trust that they're going to be able to, execute on that, and those copy exact facilities I mentioned. The other thing that the supply chain firm really helped us with is terms negotiations. If I were to print out the terms that we have with our CM, I mean, they'd probably be like many pages. It's totally insane, and you always start with their template, which means that you basically have like 100 pages of terms that are all not company friendly, and you have to dig your way out of them. And if you don't know what to look for, which is basically everything, you could end up getting screwed. And one of the things you want to have help on, if you don't have the expertise yourself, is really making sure that every single term related to manufacturing flaws is really on the CM. It's amazing how much they want to put on you in spite of it not being a design flaw. Like, you should only be, as an entrepreneur, as a startup, you should only be responsible for the design that you handed off to them. But it's incredible how many template terms across the board require you actually, at the very least, eating part of the cost of their own issues. And it doesn't mean they're a bad CM. It's just that's the way the industry works. It's sort of like right now we're looking for new office space, and everyone says, oh, it's like 4,000 square feet, and it's actually 1,500. And you ask, like, why aren't you honest? And they're like, well, no one else is. It's same thing. The other thing too is that prepayment terms for startups are very cash intensive. The first terms that they came to us with required that we paid for 100% of our inventory up front, which is totally insane. And we sold a bunch, which was great, but we didn't want to run ourselves into the ground just in order to be able to fulfill demand. That's a good problem, of course. The more cash and capital and demand that you can prove that you have both in your bank account, and whatnot, will get you better terms. We're now down to 80%, but given a bunch of non-dilutive capital that we've gotten recently in the form of non-recurring engineering investment and grants have helped us. I hope, fingers crossed, this will probably be on the internet, which is probably not a great thing, but I'm hoping to get us to 50% for our first run, which we're currently producing. And the idea is that we'll certainly be to 0% prepayment terms by the end of the year. So with a few more revs and building credit with them and whatnot. So where are we? We, incredibly, even though we've been manufacturing for a while, and what does that mean? We're doing manufacturing validation runs right now, so we do a series of smaller runs, put them out into the field, test them, try to break them, go back, start over. We had our first article run 100% yield, which is somewhat unheard of, but that was pretty amazing, and our team is very excited about that. That being said, even though the product from a hardware perspective has been locked for a while, and that's why we felt comfortable doing a pre-order, you never really stop, particularly with anything that will bring your costs down even by a few cents. It's insane how happy I can get about just a few pennies shaved off, and that's because we will be in retail later this year, and all the margins make all the difference. And so we're actually still doing cost reductions. On a weekly basis, we're hearing about like a transistor that can be replaced with something else. But at some point we're gonna have to stop and just get these to people. So we're in that process. The 3PL is the drop shipment partner. I actually decided not to work with our supply chain firm on this because I didn't really think that they could bring $20,000 worth of value to this process. I think they did. We paid so much more than that to them during this time, but I think actually that I've learned enough that I'm ready to do it myself. We'll see how that goes. So I'm actually sourcing that right now. And I do actually believe that we're finally in a place, both from a financing perspective and just a company trajectory perspective, to hire someone in-house to do all of this because I'm going crazy. So that's my story. Yeah. Thank you.
What does your team look like these days?
Where
did you find them?
Sure. So we're really small. We, as of 2 weeks ago, are 7 people. We were 6 people before that, and 4 people for a very long time before that. So I started the company in November 2012, and the reason I'm like going back is just I'm actually really proud of how much we've been able to do with so few people. I worked a lot of startups that have been acquired, and successful in certain ways that society believes are successful, but they were so bloated, and I think that that's something we've tried not to do. So we have 1 hardware engineer, 1 firmware engineer, 1 networking engineer, like one of anything. We are finally getting to the point now where we will be starting to hire a 2nd hardware engineer, a 2nd firmware engineer, but it's pretty focused. And so it's all engineers except for me. And I did hire my marketing intern to help me with marketing and operations stuff as of a couple weeks ago. So that's what the team looks like.
And where did you find out, or I guess it's always hustling, but it's always helpful or also trying to hire.
Yeah, so I had this idea, and I'm not an electrical engineer, and all I could think was like, this is never going to happen. Like, how is this ever going to happen? And I basically started lurking at NYC Resistor, that hardware hack space that I mentioned to you guys. And I met the person who ended up being our first employee and still our lead hardware engineer there. And so, then I became really and he was one of the co-founders of Resistor. MakerBot tried to hire him to join the team. He was like, I'm never gonna have a job. So we're his first job ever. He's amazing. And so we, became part of that ecosystem. And ultimately, I didn't think I was gonna have to, but we have such a highly specialized engineering track for all of our disciplines that we have had to use recruiters to find really, really, really highly specialized people. Because we're not just looking for an electrical engineer that can do a lot. We're looking for electrical engineers with specific, RF specialization, and then even more than that on ad hoc reconfigurable networking. So we have had to do some of that.
How hard is that?
It's not so hard as it is expensive. Recruiters love to take a lot of money.
Questions? This one over there.
Well, you mentioned about supply chain. What did you do about reverse supply chain? How did you deal with complaints and
Reverse supply chain?
Just repeat the question.
I think you asked just what have I done about the reverse supply chain? Great question. That's what I'm working on right now. So we have done pre-orders, so we don't actually have any, refunds or warranty rework just yet. But in the terms with the CM, you have to lay out exactly what you're going to do if something is either faulty, but maybe it's not faulty, but the box has been opened. There's all these things have to be set up with the CM. But for the most part, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're building the product and hoping that we have 99% yield, right? And so that there's very few people who are returning it because it doesn't work, but it does happen. We're going to have every return sent to us directly so we can take a look at it and so we need to know exactly what's going on before we send anything back to the CM. But for the most part, there's actually laws that don't let you, even if something is perfectly, it was never even used, but the box was opened, you can't legally sell it as new again. So that's going to be, Hanukkah gifts for my family for the next 20 years, press, promotions or whatnot. So you do need, but we're going to get everything, in the office, inspect it, and then decide what to do. But for the most part, if something doesn't work, you want the CM to replace it with totally new product, and that should be in your terms. No.
normally companies don't do that?
Sorry?
Sorry, normally companies don't do that. What they do with defective products is when somebody else complains, instead of giving them a new one, they give used, corrected, or repaired.
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to be doing refurbished products for people. Unless maybe, I don't know. I mean, we're not Apple. I don't think anyone wants the goTenna refurbished version. Maybe one day we'll be that lucky, but we're going to be giving people new products. We also have a warranty, a year. Maybe we'll look into it later and get even more than that. But all of that is part of the CM process, negotiation process.
One question over there.
What was the toughest challenge you guys had to overcome, and how were you able to accomplish it?
The toughest challenge generally or in supply chain specifically?
Just in general.
Your top 10 toughest challenges.
I mean, everything is really hard. And once you solve a problem, you have 15 other things. You're oh, I didn't even know I had to think about that. We have this product that is very constricted, as most electronics are, by the laws of physics. And I think one of the hardest challenges actually is not from the engineering perspective, because engineers understand, for instance, okay, so goTenna works for any EE, RF nerds out there. We work on VHF frequencies. Specifically, our first product works on 151 to 154 megahertz. So to put that into perspective, Wi-Fi is 2.4 gigahertz. Regular consumer walkie-talkies are between 400 to 900 megahertz, so we're much lower. If any of you know what ham radio is, we're closest to that. And so people who understand spectrum, though, they understand how we can characterize the range that you can get point to point with goTenna. With meshing, it's a whole other ballgame. But I think one of the biggest challenges we have and still have is educating people about what you can expect. It's funny, someone who is not a consumer and is actually an engineer asked me a question, it's what is your packet loss rate? And it's well, if you're inside a Faraday cage, it's 100% packet loss. If you're out in an open desert, and within range of something, or even it's going to be 100%. So it's very dependent on your environment and your terrain and where you literally are. And I think that's a really big challenge that I'm still having a lot of trouble working around, because actually all radio companies, whether it's Motorola or Harris or whomever, Raytheon, whomever's making radios, whether it's for the military, consumers, or everything, like realtors and CMs, they lie about everything. They give you the theoretical max versus the most realistic range in most scenarios. And I think that's actually been very, that's a hard thing to parse our way through.
Okay, time for one last question.
Do you have any lessons on FCC approval? I think I read that you are stuck doing point-to-point. You'd love to do mesh, and the FCC won't let you yet. Is any lessons for folks who are trying to do something helpful like that?
So the question was, how do you deal with like FCC regulation, and FCC kind of sucks with regards to certain innovation, even though they are actually tasked with enabling innovation in the communication space. Okay, the first part is that the way to like get your FCC license is to follow the rules. You know, pretty easy. There's a million trolls on the internet, particularly when we launched, who were like, they're never going to get their license. We already had it. We haven't even talked about it publicly because it doesn't matter to anyone other than ham radio people. But so that's the first thing. Two is that the FCC is a funny beast, because at once it has to enforce regulations that benefit incumbents, so people who want things to stay exactly the way they are. So that's telcos, you know, current radio, current major radio manufacturers, etc. But the funny thing is that all of those, you know, the incumbents right now were all a little goTenna maybe once before, and they've managed to push a lot of really innovative and interesting new technology through. So the answer, I would probably say, I mean, this is a really douchebaggy thing to say, but my lawyers would say, like, don't say that much, but we're going to do a bunch of really cool stuff with meshing. So, but we are 100% following the rules. So, yeah.
Something to look forward to. All right, wonderful. That was terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.